listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
And welcome to the GM Shuffle, presented by VSiN and DraftKings. DraftKings, the crown is yours. Dave Ross, Mark Dominik, our GM here at VSiN. Mark, great to be with you on this Monday. A whole lot of news and notes to get to, and certainly the big news, it feels like in the last 24 hours, it's what's happening in Cincinnati. We're seeing multiple reports that it looks like the wide receivers, both of them, are done. Ja'Marr Chase and Tee Higgins going to be back in the fold. I know that's going to make Joe Burrow very happy. From a monetary standpoint, was this money well spent? And did they get the best of the deals, or could they have gotten a better deal a little bit earlier in the NFL calendar?
Yeah, Dave. Look, this is huge news for the Bengals, right? I mean, every Bengal fan out there, Joe Burrow, everyone should be celebrating that the fact that they've got both these deals done this early before we get to the offseason program. This could have lingered all the way up to the franchise deadline. The Bengals did what the Bengals do. They used leverage in this situation and had that franchise tag on Tee Higgins, and it kind of put them in a little bit of a bind, I think, for Tee Higgins' camp. And again, I think the deals are on par. I think Ja'Marr Chase, where he is probably with the 4-year extension is what I believe it is, puts him at 36.5, puts him at the highest, and that's kind of where he belongs, right? Tee Higgins snuck in just under 20 or 30 million a year, which I think is a huge win for the Cincinnati Bengals. I think if he goes out in free agency, he's in the mid-30s to that 33, 35 range easy, based off of the amount of clubs that wanted him. Put this in perspective. The team that used to, be probably on the cheap has now invested in Joe Burrow, Tee Higgins, and Ja'Marr Chase $551 million. $500 million between three players. That's where the National Football League is now currently with these kind of numbers. Huge decision out of Cincinnati. I applaud them. I think it's the right move. Usually you don't want to pay two receivers, but when you have Joe Burrow and you feel like you're close, and I feel like Cincinnati's close, I think the move makes sense. They're just going to have to draft extremely well over the next couple of years to fill in some blanks.
And that's the thing. Ja'Marr Chase is now the highest paid non-quarterback in the history of the NFL. Mark, as you alluded, that 4-year extension, $161 million contract, 112 of which is guaranteed. So that is the big news there for Chase. And it's going to be a $115 million contract here for Tee Higgins, as you mentioned, with guarantees up to $30 million per year with incentives. So again, Joe Burrow really lobbied for this, right? He said, this is what I want. So you mentioned team construction. It looks like Trey Hendrickson may be the last of that big three. We'll see if they can get that deal done. But right now in the marketplace, you can look at the Bengals here about 18, 19-1 to win the Super Bowl. You got to feel better about it if you're a Bengal backer, that at least you know a team that's going to average around 30 points a game. They've got that side of the ball you feel like taken care of, Mark. Is that just a fight fire with fire scenario? They just couldn't let those guys go?
Yeah, they're just that good, right? When you have two number one wide receivers, how rare that is to be in that kind of situation. That's how you budget it. And they budget it, look at their running back with Chase Brown, still kind of on a rookie deal. So that's affordable. So you start to look about where did they cut some spots, in terms of being able to afford this. And they have to make tough decisions. Hopefully Trey Hendrickson can find that common ground as well. But this is an opportunity for the Bengals that say, hey, look, we think we're close. And that's what they're telling you. And that's what ownership believes, let alone coaches and everybody. But you've got to say kudos to Tee Higgins and his agent to be able to come to an agreement, to find the common ground. I don't think Ja'Marr Chase was a hard one. I think Tee Higgins might have been a little bit more tricky based off of that franchise number and that tag number. But again, this is great news for Bengals fans. It's great news for wide receivers in the National Football League. And the rich just keep getting richer. And that's what's happened in Cincinnati. And again, over $500 million between three players is an amazing amount of money allocated just on one side of the ball.
I think naysayers are going to say, well, you had those three guys last year. You didn't make the playoffs. Joey Burrow doesn't get injured. That's a playoff team, right, Mark? I mean, that's the way you realistically have to look at this thing is it wasn't the offense, obviously, that was a problem. It was that injury. And even with the defensive liabilities, that's a playoff team if Joe Burrow doesn't get hurt.
Yeah, I think that, and they had some injuries at the cornerback position that kind of hurt them for a little while. Cam Taylor-Britt went through a little bit of a down part, but they kind of rallied around towards the end of the season. So they had a lot of issues, I think, on the back end of their defense with injuries. And then certainly, obviously, with Joe Burrow. But this is a playoff team. And right now, it'd be hard not to think that the Cincinnati Bengals aren't going to make the postseason in 2025, let alone have a chance to win the division again. I think they're going to be in that position.
Second betting choice right now behind Baltimore to win that division next year. Derek Stingley Jr. rather, has now been re-signed. He's been extended with the Texans. Speaking of a playoff team the last 2 years, boy, have they drafted well the last couple of years. Stingley, part of that deal, 3 years, $90 million extension there. That makes him the highest paid corner in the NFL. What do you make of that news? And it feels like DeMeco Ryans is like, we're not letting Stingley get to the open market.
Yeah, they're going to lock him up early. He just came off his best year by far. He already was a good player coming into the draft. Certainly, you think about that LSU. Think about the players that have come through LSU. Stingley, Burrow. It's incredible what that class produced. What was at LSU for those, that little moment in time. But, Stingley obviously reset the market for cornerbacks by a significant mark, almost $5 million a year, which is huge. Big news out of Houston. Certainly a guy that I think that they saw the market's only going to go up for. I'm sure Sauce Gardner right now is very excited about this deal and what that might mean for him at some point. But, it's a deal I didn't expect. It's certainly a deal that they've obviously been working on to get to that kind of number. But I think they just wanted to get some security and make sure they've got their key guys locked down. They've done that now. And so kudos to the Houston Texans. But I'm surprised the number jumped to that much, to get to $30 million a year. There are some clubs around the National Football League. They're like, we can't pay everybody. But the Texans have said, hey, we're going to pay this one. And, Stingley gets that big extension, and huge news out of, the Texans today.
Yeah, you're right, though. Could you imagine those LSU wars that they had between Chase, Burrow, and Stingley at practice? Those must have been fun to watch there, that type of high-end talent. Aaron Rodgers, we know he's a high-end talented quarterback. He's going to be a Hall of Famer one day. Right now, he's a man without a team. So it does feel like, I don't want to say, I know some people use the term he's holding the Steelers hostage out there. Aaron Rodgers has never been a free agent. This is the first time ever. Mark, is he doing his due diligence as a free agent to say, hey, I've been around this game for a long time. I'm not rushing into anything. How is that timeline working for the teams and for Aaron?
Well, as a former GM, I'm not a big fan of what Aaron's doing at all. It's not like he didn't know this was coming, right? It's not like he was sitting there going, well, we'll see what happens with the Jets. He's had more than a month to realize that was gone, and that he's looking for a new home. I think he's had more than enough to realize that the Giants are out there knocking on the door, as are the Pittsburgh Steelers, allegedly the Minnesota Vikings, which to me would make zero sense in the end game. But that's, again, another team to put in the mix. It feels like it's a leverage game. And this is the disappointment I have in Aaron. I've never met Aaron Rodgers. I still think, like I've said on here, I still think he can play. I think he's got a year or two left in him. I'm assuming he wants to play. The longer he waits, the more I start to wonder, does he really want to play? But you're keeping two teams in hostage situations right now where one needs to find out what they're going to do and the other one doesn't know. Somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, and there's only, Russell Wilson available. Kirk Cousins gets his option, his guaranteed money picked up. So that was a person you were wondering. But I don't like it from the simple fact is he's known what's going on. I am sure there's been tons of discussions. I would have thought by any means that by this morning, we would have seen Aaron Rodgers has landed at this team. But to draw this out and draw this longer only hurts the two clubs. And it's only going to kill, one of these franchises if they're not prepared to be able to make that next move. So disappointing by Aaron, in my opinion. I know it's his option. He can do what he wants to do. But if this is about trying to win a championship or prove people wrong, it shouldn't be about using leverage and getting more money from somebody. It should be like, I just want to find a home and I want to get myself settled. And it's just surprising that we're here.
You mentioned Kirk Cousins and that his guaranteed roster bonus here has been picked up for $10 million in 2026. He's going to be the backup to Michael Penix Jr. in Atlanta. Did that surprise you, or is this just one of those things? If you're Terry Fontenot, you're like, all right, I can't go down this road. I made a decision to draft Penix last year when we gave the big money to Kirk as a free agent, and we're going to keep this 2 quarterback headed monster going on. But that's a lot of money for one position to fill.
Yeah, and it sounds good right now in March, where you're saying, hey, look, we've got, a great backup in Kirk Cousins, right? Congratulations. Then Michael Penix did have some injury history in college, as we all know. But, talk to me when it's, the offseason program. Talk to me when we get to camp. Talk to me about who's first in and first out of the building. Talk to me about who's kind of just checked in or checked out. Like, that's where Kirk Cousins could be or could go. And that might not be the recipe they're hoping for. Again, I understand. saying, hey, look, we've already budgeted for these two players anyway. So why are we going to let Kirk Cousins out the door when we're sitting there going, hey, we need a backup quarterback and we've already paid for him. We've agreed that that's a number we're comfortable with. I just don't know, again, it's easy to sit here in March and say, hey, this makes sense because X, Y, and Z. It's going to be a lot different in Atlanta, I think, come July and August when we see what difference does Kirk Cousins, does he show up to the offseason program at all? Does he want to, right? At all? Those are the things you got to really think about. And that's something I think that's going to be interesting to watch how Kirk Cousins plays this out over the next couple months.
Fascinating. I don't think I didn't see a scenario where that was going to be those two guys coexisting in the quarterback room there with those type of salaries. You got one on a rookie deal and the big free agent money you gave to Kirk Cousins last year. The Vikings made a move. They got Jordan Mason. They've signed him out of the Niners in exchange for a swap pick there for a 2025 pick. And it looks like a 6th rounder next year as well. And Raheem Mostert is going to go to the Raiders here on a 1-year small deal, $2.1 million deal. Out of those running back moves there, either one of those pique your interest at all?
Yeah, they're good moves. I think Mason, just by bringing him into the organization, I think that's going to be a solid move. It's obviously comfort with the system. I think that's all a really good. I think that's a better fit overall, just because, again, familiarity with probably the verbiage and all that kind of language. It's all very interesting. And I would rehash on Kirk Cousins. There is still a chance where they could trade him. Like they certainly got the leverage. And so, you got to keep your eyes on Atlanta. Maybe it's maybe they can push for whoever comes in second on the Aaron Rodgers. Maybe that's the debate where, like, what are you willing to give up for him? And so I'm going to keep my eye on Kirk Cousins. I'm not assuming, hey, this is done and he's an Atlanta Falcon for 2025. I got to think the Giants certainly have their eyes on Kirk Cousins.
And also, very quickly, Mark, that's one of those deals they didn't want to just take the dead cap hit and cut him, knowing somebody else is going to pursue him. This has got to be one of those moves that you're looking down the chessboard a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. That's exactly the way I would look at it. That you're just trying to get yourself as much leverage, and that $10 million isn't going to make a big difference when you might get multiple draft picks out of Kirk Cousins.
Excellent. That's why you're our GM here, Mark. You're always seeing where that chessboard is moving here. When we come back, let's get your winners and losers so far in free agency. That is next here on the GM Show.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
We are back on the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Dave Ross alongside Mark Dominik. And Mark, it feels like we can exhale a little bit. I know free agency, it's not fully done. There's still going to be moves to make. We got the April draft coming up next month now. But have you had enough time to kind of evaluate winners and losers so far in what you've seen in the offseason? Because I do feel like before you get to that draft, some of these moves that you've already seen might set the table for how you're going to draft. Is that kind of the two-headed nature of it? Like, hey, let's get some free agents, and then that's going to help us determine what we need to do to supplement what we couldn't get in free agency in the draft come next month.
Yeah, I think so. And again, people say you draft the best player available based off of what your team needs, right? So we saw free agency kind of lock some players up, maybe change boards. Like that's a big piece of why, I really didn't bring the scouts in until April after, let them go hit the pro days right now where they're out running around, and then come in April. Cause now you can kind of really look, what did your team accomplish in free agency? What were the goals we tried to establish? And where are our needs and strengths on our football team currently to make sure we set the board appropriately, that we get the right players, but also that we've got to make sure that, hey, look, I need a left guard, and we've got to make sure we don't overinflate him, but we are certainly got to make sure that guy that we had in the third round, let's take one more look at him. Maybe he is a second round type of talent. So you're doing all that right now, but free agency is in phase 2, right? Phase 1 usually is about 48 to 72 hours after the start of free agency. So right around Friday, and that's where you saw most of the multi-year deals. Right now, you're kind of seeing agents, sit, in situations where they're trying to get their veteran a home now. So you're seeing a lot more 1-year deals, still for some significant money, good money on the 1-year deals, but more 1-year deals because every agent out there knows, look, every day that goes on is one last chance that my guy's going to get signed, or we're going to be at the minimum salary benefit and we've got to get things moving. So it's an aggressive time still for agents to try to get their players into a home at a decent number. But there's 3 phases to free agency. We're in phase 2 where you're still seeing guys and good names, still good players that are available on the street. And then we're going to move into phase 3, which is like, that's where you start to pick. And phase 3 is about a week from now. where you hit phase 3, where now it's kind of like you're cherry picking if you want something, but really as an organization, you kind of like push the brakes. Let's really focus on the draft. So when you walk through the different phases, deep into phase 2 right now, there's a couple teams that really stand out to me, Dave, that have done really good in free agency. And it's not always like, who did they sign, right? Because it's also who did they retain? Because that's a big part of free agency, because really as an ideal organization, you want to just draft players, sign your own players, keep them, and then just maybe fill in the blanks. Who's won free agency? I think it's the Buffalo Bills. I think the Buffalo Bills have wonderful free agency. When you think about just the different guys, right? Not only did Josh Allen restructure, but then you start to think about Greg Rousseau getting a deal done, or Terrell Bernard getting his deal done, or Shakir getting his deal done. So that's 3 guys that they kind of locked in, plus getting like a Joey Bosa, who obviously I think is going to be a big impact player, letting Von Miller out the door. Getting a Josh Palmer, who I think is a better player than people realize. I think he's a guy that's kind of always outside in the Chargers, but I think he's a really good wide receiver. So I think those kind of moves have been very good to the Buffalo Bills. I still think there's a couple more guys that you could see. And I like the Michael Hoyt signing. I know he's suspended for 6 games, but I think that's a really good dynamic player you can use in different spots in your defense and become a really impactful player for him. So I like all those moves. And I still think that a Christian Bernard, or Christian with their cornerback, Benford, could be a guy that you could also see as one more extension as well. So I love what the Buffalo Bills have done in free agency as one of my top 3 winners.
And again, that's one of those of keeping mostly Josh Palmer, as you mentioned, the addition from the Chargers, but pretty much keeping your own, kind of like what the Bengals have decided to do with their money moves here. We're going to spend on our guys and keep it in-house because we feel like we're close. So if you've got the Bills as one of those top 3, give me number 2 on the winner side so far in the second phase of free agency.
A lot of people picked them as winners of free agency last year. It didn't quite work out that way for them. But it is hard not to look at the Chicago Bears and what they've done. It is hard not to look at that offensive line, because that's really critical for Caleb Williams of what they're going to be and what he's going to be. And so when you get Drew Dahlman, who I think is an underrated center, to be able to plug him right in, when you get Jonah Jackson in a trade and you get Joe Tooney, who's also another in a trade, you've just solidified your offensive line, because I feel really good about tackles. And now I feel like you're inside. I mean, that's going to be a top 5 offensive line, I think, in the National Football League that stays healthy. It should be. And so when you've got a young quarterback, and your number one goal as a GM to me is identify the quarterback, protect the quarterback, then you go attack the quarterback, right? That's kind of my mindset of how you would build a football team. And the Bears have tried, right, last year to kind of get Caleb comfortable, but they've really done a concentrated effort. And I got to give Ryan Poles a lot of credit. He's a guy that was on the bubble for me. Like, should he stay the GM? What's really going on here? I think this offseason, the Chicago Bears have really done a good job of maybe not focusing on all the sexiness, like, oh, look at this wide receiver's name and look at this running back name or look at this tight end. It's been, how do we win? And I think that what they're doing in the trenches is the right move. So I really like what Chicago's doing in terms of free agency, in terms of building stability on that offensive line to really have building blocks for the future of Caleb Williams.
Oh, I love it. I'm right there with you in that one. And again, when you get a new center and 2 new guards, the interior of that offensive line, you hope now in free agency that is set. That is money well spent. And then you go out and get a Grady Jarrett on the other side of the ball to help plug that D line. I mean, you're building on both sides of the line here for Chicago. The antithesis of what we saw last year, going and getting free agent wide receivers, trading for wide receivers. Now it feels like we're building it the right way, the Mark Dominik way there on the interior. I think that makes a lot of sense. All right, give me a winner, a third winner so far in free agency.
Yeah, this one's where they went out and they added 2 guys. They just said, hey, look, we're going to go get 2 players. We're going to put them on the roster. We need an offensive lineman. We need a corner. And they're a young football team across the board, a very talented football team, and that's the Green Bay Packers. They have done a very good job. They go get Aaron Banks, and they go get Dobbs, the cornerback from the Raiders, Hobbs, excuse me. So they get those 2 players, and they're like, hey, look, we want a starting corner. We want a starting offensive line, starting guard. And boom, boom, boom. They put both players in, and they just keep moving, right? Because they've got a lot of young players that they're going to want to extend here in the coming years because of how good they've drafted over the last couple of years. So this is a team that said, hey, look, we're going to really, really be focused and laser pointed what we want to do in free agency, and then we're getting out. So they did that. They went in, boom, got their 2 players, got out, and now they're just going to keep cruising along and keep drafting this football team. So I like what the Packers did. A close 4th team was the Chiefs have done a good job of trying to keep everybody together. and I like what the Chiefs had done, but I thought the Packers were a very precision type of free agency where it looks like they had a plan. They were going to execute it and get out and get to work on the draft. That's what the Packers have done.
They got a Hobbs and a Dobbs now. So we got a Hobbs on defense and a Dobbs on offense at wide receiver. So it does feel a good news for the Packers and for the Bears. Maybe not so much for the Vikings and Detroit. That division feels like might be getting tighter and tighter and tighter. Really good 4 teams there. All right, if we've got the good, I'm sure we're going to have the bad. Any teams so far that you feel like maybe in free agency a little bit lackluster to begin?
Yeah, I mean, right now I don't love what Cleveland's done. I mean, I get that Myles Garrett played him, and so like I want out of here, and I want to play for a winner, and then he turns around and takes all this money. He says it wasn't about the money when we all know it was about the money. You trade for Kenny Pickett. And, and I understand they got the second pick in the draft and that's still wide open. I know that, they had Russell Wilson walk through the building and things like that, but it just feels like to me, it doesn't feel like a great plan in place. It feels like things are kind of just coming together, but I don't feel like the synergy of like, hey, this is what we're doing this offseason. We're going to focus on these things. It just became Myles Garrett became a headline. They found a way to fix it by just throwing the entire Brinks truck at him, which that works. And then they're still sitting there in this quarterback limbo. And to trade for a Kenny Pickett, who I got no problem with him going in there. But, I mean, this is a team that maybe they don't like the quarterback situation as the number 2 pick. And maybe they think that this is Kenny Pickett's team. It just scares me a little bit where they're sitting, even though I know the number 2 pick in the draft probably is a quarterback for the Cleveland Browns just based off of long term. I just haven't loved their plan. I feel like it's a team that's not drafted well, honestly, over the last 5 years. And really doesn't have a lot of new things coming into the organization as well. So it's kind of a tough season, I think, in Cleveland. Is one of the 3 losers right now in free agency.
It's amazing how you back up that Brinks truck and it makes Myles Garrett very happy all of a sudden. At least he, for a guy that wants to go out and saying the hourglass is going the other way in my career, I want to play for a winner. That did not happen, but he did get paid. That's for sure. You have not mentioned my team yet, America's team, so I'm glad. I wonder, though, are they going to be on your list here for teams that have maybe underachieved so far in free agency?
Yeah, no. I like what, Osa Digizua is a guy that people just, I think if you know who he is, you watch his game tape, you respect him. And that's a really player that I think was huge that they're able to retire. We're going to see what happens with Micah Parsons. Certainly that's interesting. I think they kept Malik Hooker. He had a big guaranteed salary come up over the weekend that I didn't see get denied. So I don't think the Cowboys are there. I think one of the teams that kind of just had a bland, and I think it's really kind of a bland offseason. So I put them in kind of a loser because they spent $40 million, but I don't know if they got any better, and that's the Miami Dolphins. I feel like they just kind of free agency and kind of like, boom, we signed $40 million or four players in that, but I don't feel like they got any bit better anywhere on the team. I just feel like they're just kind of cruising through. And I think because of where I think the Patriots were very aggressive and spent a lot of money, which they had a lot of it. And then what I talked about the Buffalo Bills, I feel like Miami just kind of like sat in limbo and just kind of sat there. And I think that's one. Does that make you a loser in free agency? No, I don't mind a team that doesn't do a lot, but I do think when you drop $40 million, I would like to have more of an impact. I just don't feel like they got an impact with that money.
Then agree. And see how I just shamelessly got Dallas in the conversation because I just wanted to get your grade on them to see if, but they didn't make the bottom 3, which is good news to me. What any other teams though that did stand out so far besides now Cleveland and Miami, kind of the got to do more list? Is there any other teams so far that you think maybe could have done a little bit better job here, spending that money or spending a little bit more wisely?
Well, the one team that's interesting to me is the Colts, right? They go out and get Bynum and Ward, so they spend money on the secondary. And then, probably the most interesting decision was Daniel Jones and deciding to go to the Colts. To me, that was about cashing in $14 million, not so much what's best for him long term. And that's what I think about Daniel Jones. I really think he should have Sam Darnold it and just go, let's go back to Minnesota, take half. I mean, this isn't about the money. He's got money. This is about like being in the right system and really kind of having a chance. And you go back to Minnesota and you play alongside of JJ, and maybe JJ is a little slow to come back, or maybe he has a setback, or Daniel Jones gets to come in and go, wow, he can play. Instead, now he's going to go learn another system in another competition. And I just feel like long term, I don't love it for Daniel Jones, even though I could be dead wrong. That's what we get to do here. But I just feel like it's not the right fit for him right now. Even though I see the opportunity is the door is open, I just didn't love the signing.
I'm with you. Like he chose Minnesota once the Giants released him, and now he chooses to go to the Colts. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Let's get to the NFC West. That's next year in the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
We are back on the GM Shuffle. Dave Ross and Mark Dominik here. This, of course, is presented by DraftKings and VSiN. And Mark, I can't wait to get to you in the next segment. We're going to get back to building the draft board here. You're going to take a look at those running backs coming out in the April draft. So maybe some of these teams we're talking about will get some help at that position. But I look at the Niners, and certainly in the NFC West, when you look at the futures boards here, and now that we're knee deep in free agency, a lot of trades, a lot of activity in the NFL, I am a little surprised they're still the betting favorite to win the NFC West. Now, I get it. They figure, hey, once we get our running back, CMC, Christian McCaffrey, we're going to pay Brock Purdy. He's our quarterback of the future. We're going to be just fine. Is it that simple for San Francisco? Because I feel like certainly the Rams, and I think you can make a case for Seattle, we'll get to them too, that maybe the division is starting to catch up on the Niners. Is this one of those, man, we're so used to always thinking the Niners are the best team out West, we got to open them up as the favorite to win the West again?
Yeah, I feel like you're right. I think it's just they feel like they have to, but I feel like what you feel. You think about a division that's very, very tight. I mean, Arizona, I think, took good strides last year, right? You think about just them seeing where they do. The Sam Darnold contract in Seattle is obviously, as I kind of thought and we talked about, right? You could do a one-year deal kind of close to the Baker Mayfield. Exactly what we talked about, I think, last week was here's a deal where you can do $100 million, do 1 year, see if Sam Darnold's the guy you believe he can be. If you're right, congratulations, you Baker Mayfield it. And if you're wrong, you can walk away from it. But I like what Seattle did. I think that they've done a good free agency, got themselves in good position. And then it's hard not to like what the Rams do based off of how young their defense is, but to keep Matt Stafford there and, continue to add to their football team, obviously with an elite receiver too. So it's each one of those teams feels like they're getting a little bit or incrementally better, where the 49ers are just trying to keep everything together, which I get it. But I mean, you look at the Denver Broncos and, they steal the safety, they steal the linebacker from the 49ers. Those are good players that the 49ers no longer have. And it's hard to hold on to all these players. So I agree with you. I think that this one's a much more pick 'em almost when I look at all four teams. And I know that sounds a lot for Arizona to sit there. Wait a second. You think Arizona might be pick 'em? I think that, that team should be better even next year, in my opinion, based off, I think, what they've done so far. So I like this entire division. I actually would lean towards the Rams as the team that I think would be the one that I would say, if I had to pick one in that division, I would choose the Rams as that division winner right now.
Yeah, they've moved up on the futures board to win the Super Bowl up to 22-1. So that number's gotten shorter. Obviously, when you re-sign, you bring back Matthew Stafford. You go get Devontae Adams now to be his, you would think, wide receiver one. Cooper Kupp now, of course, is good. I know you still have Puka Nacua there as well, but that feels like a pretty formidable 1-2 in that race there. For the Niners, you trade away Deebo Samuel. He's now in D.C. We don't know what's going to happen there, Brandon Ayuk. We know that you've been talking about Ricky Pearsall, and that's kind of a move there that they really think Pearsall is going to be that emerging guy. In that wide receiver room, is it more about that, or is it really about Christian McCaffrey? Because as long as he's healthy, not only is he a great running back, but can use him out of the backfield as that swing back too to get him in space. And that feels like that helps in that wide receiver room when Christian McCaffrey is healthy.
Oh, for sure. I mean, Christian's a huge piece of this equation. It was a big move at the time, for John Lynch and company to go get Christian McCaffrey from Carolina. And I know that there's been missed time there, but he is such a spark plug in terms of what they can do. It allows Kittle. Ayuk, I still think, is 100% going to be on this football team and be part of the bigger picture. And then you got Ricky Pearsall. So you've got players at all three levels. The running back, the tight end, the wide receivers, all can create mismatches based off their skill set. And that's a beautiful thing in San Francisco. And that's why Brock Purdy is going to get their contract and get paid. And this team is going to be a good football team. I just don't know if they've lost too much on the defensive side to overcome a little bit. And again, I think there'll be, Aaron Banks leaving. Yeah, that's a big loss in terms of a whole. But I think that they have other players in that roster where I still think they're going to be okay there. But they're going to be banking on health all year long, right? Can Trent Williams play another season? Can CMC stay out there on the football field? Where's George Kittle now in terms of health? So that's going to be the big thing that's going to really be the catalyst or the pitfall for, I think, the 49ers in 2025.
When I look at Seattle, and I know, this is year number 2 now for McDonald as the head coach there. I really like what he did in year 1 coming over from Baltimore. And then they cleaned out that wide receiver room, right? The big trade, DK Metcalf goes to Pittsburgh. You flat out cut Tyler Lockett. Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to be the true number one. And then you go give a 3-year deal to Cooper Kupp to come in as the number 2. And you switch quarterbacks, right? Geno Smith is out here in the desert now with the Raiders. You're bringing Sam Darnold. It's a lot of change right now in year 1 from year 2 for Coach McDonald. But this feels like a plan that Schneider, certainly as the GM, has had in place. Do you like the direction? Now, they've been shorted a little bit to 6-1 from 7-1 to win the division. Not a massive move, but still a full dollar. Does that show a little bit of confidence that the front office and new head coach know what they're doing in reshaping this team?
Yeah, I think it does. And it tells you that, when they break down Tyler Lockett versus Cooper Kupp, they still feel like there's a lot of value in Cooper Kupp. And that's a big deal. When you break down Jackson Smith and Jigba and you sat there and drafted him as what I thought was, the best receiver that's come out of Ohio State in a long time, I'm waiting to see him have the shot to be the number 1 receiver. And I think John Schneider and company are too. And I think it's buying into what they're selling, being part of the new culture of the building. I think all those things are part of what they're trying to build in Seattle with the Seahawks. And it's a hard thing to do. John's been there for a long time as a GM. He's seen a Super Bowl championship. He's had to rebuild this football team. They're in the middle of it. I think they got the offensive line in pretty good shape. So I like the moves that Seattle did. I think that, as much as it's hard not to have a DK there or a Lockett, guys that we're so familiar with, to tell me that you got Smith, Jigba, and obviously Cooper Kupp, I don't feel like the steps back very far. And I think there's a chance Sam Darnold is better than Geno Smith. It's hard not to sit there and go, I understand that move too, based off of where Geno Smith is maybe in his career versus where Sam Darnold is. And so I think the moves are calculated. Again, they've got flexibility within them. And it doesn't stop them from saying, hey, we want to draft a quarterback in round 1 or round 2, because we're going to make sure we get this right. That's still on the table, I think, for not only, obviously the Seattle Seahawks, but some of these other clubs.
I look at the Bears, and I lived in Chicago for 8 years. I know how passionate that fan base is, and sometimes they're going to overspend with their futures money. 35-1, now that number's come down. Optimism in Chicago. And you mentioned in the last segment, the offensive line. I love what they've done there for Caleb Williams in year 2. But I want to ask you about Ben Johnson in year 1. Because you mentioned Ryan Poles, what it looks like on paper. I'm with you. It looks like a really good knockout free agency here from the GM perspective. What about Ben in year 1 as a new head coach? How different will that be for him from being a coordinator? And it sounded like he liked being a coordinator too, right? He could have had a head coaching opportunity last year. He turned it down. But why now do you feel like Ben is the right guy in year 1 to be able to walk into Chicago, not easy, and have success right away?
Well, I mean, the players are going to believe in him. That's the first step, right? The players are like, I've seen this guy. He's called plays. It's been successful. We've seen Detroit. We've seen what that offense has turned into. And yes, there's a lot of good players in that offense as well. And it's going to get to Caleb Williams. And will Caleb put in the work that's necessary to become the player that he wants to become? That will be the big question in Chicago. But they've done what I think their due diligence is in terms of getting the offense together. And it starts with protection. It starts with that part of the ball. And obviously Ben Johnson knows that very well. Look at Detroit. They have a very strong offensive line as well. And that's been a big piece of their puzzle too. So, you build in that kind of capacity. So, the Bears have moved. But again, this division, like I've talked about Green Bay being very pointed. I talked about Chicago fixing the offensive line. But it wasn't like Detroit or Minnesota had bad free agency, right? They both, the entire division's done a very good job in free agency in terms of you could pick out each team and say what worked and what didn't. I don't think any of those 4 teams would be on the losers or, the back half of free agency. I thought they all were very, very good and very poised in their free agent movement. And I like what Minnesota did. And in getting Jonathan Allen, up there in Minnesota, I think is going to be a nice fit for Flores in that defense. And I like what Detroit's done because they also know they've got more players they're going to want to pay long-term as well. So I think both teams did well. I think this whole division actually did a very good job in free agency in terms of keeping the status quo, but still upping what I think their overall talent of their football team is.
I'm with you. I think top to bottom, it feels like the North is the toughest division in football. We get it. Detroit's the favorite, and they should be with the last couple of years. But 1 through 4, that is a murderer's row to get through week in, week out in that division. Black and blue division is back, that's for sure. I look at the AFC, and I see the Steelers are 45-1 to win the Super Bowl, and that's kind of quarterback sight unseen, right? Justin Fields is gone. He's going to be with the Jets next year. You don't know if it's going to be Russell Wilson coming back. You don't know if it's going to be Aaron Rodgers, as you mentioned off the top of the show here in the GM Shuffle. Like, I don't know what to make of them, Mark, because it feels like, you need a new running back unless you really look at Jalen Warren and say he's going to be the new number one guy with Najee Harris gone. He's with the Raiders now. What do you make of the Steelers? Is it just about the quarterback? Is it just about if they get Aaron Rodgers, they got to hope? Because if not, do you really go back to Russell Wilson?
Yeah, I think you're keeping that at least in play. It'd be hard for me to not want to think that they're keeping that in play. I think they are just a quarterback away. I think defensively, obviously, the Pittsburgh Steelers are extremely talented, uber talented across the board. So I like where they are defensively. We talked about the DK Metcalf. We talked about this offseason, right? It's going to be a fun offseason for Omar Khan, the general manager there, and Mike Tomlin, because you needed to get another receiver, check. You want to get a speedster tight end. I think that they're going to still look for that maybe in the draft. And then you want to get that running back. And I think Jalen Warren is a good back, but I don't think they're done at running back. We'll talk about that in the next segment and building the board. Some of these young rookie running backs that I think are going to be available for Pittsburgh. That could be a plug and play right away. And so I think that Pittsburgh's still in a really good spot. But yeah, they're stuck, sitting on their hands going, I thought we had a guy. We don't have him yet. Don't know why. But I don't think that the Pittsburgh Steelers will go through this carousel before the draft happens. It goes, we just need a quarterback still here. I think they've got a better plan in place. I think they're waiting to see what Aaron does. And I think they're holding on to Russell on the side to say, which one is it? And all you can do is kind of play them off each other.
Yep. It's a bit perplexing as to what Aaron's going to do here. But if it is Pittsburgh, you would think that means Russell Wilson, then it's the domino effect in New York for the Giants potentially, or some of those moves there. And I'll be curious to see what Tennessee does. The market is certainly indicating Cam Ward now is a $4 betting favorite to be the first player taken with the number one pick. That is still currently held by Tennessee. So if that's the way Tennessee is going to go with that move, maybe that moves the Russell Wilsons and certainly the Aaron Rodgers off that board. Is that what you're hearing very quickly in Tennessee? It still feels like Cam Ward number one right now. That's the indication.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest. This is easy money. I think it's easy money right now.
Cam Ward minus $2.
Yeah, but I mean, let's just look at the tea leaves. The Tennessee Titans are the only team that's up there that have not brought in any quarterbacks whatsoever. Even the Cleveland Browns did. The Giants have. They've done zero, right? They've shown you nothing but bringing in those four guys. They're telling you it's Cam Ward, 100%, and they're not trading out of this pick because they know you have to take a quarterback. You can't trade out of it. So I think that's about as easy a bet as I've seen in Vegas for a long time.
We're building the board next here, the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
We are back on the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Dave Ross alongside Mark Dominik. And Mark, I know when you're building your board here for the April draft, it's very exciting to do that. I wonder now in 2025, with the resurgence of the running back position, has that affected the way you would build your board? Because it feels like just a couple of years ago, man, we can't draft running backs too high, right? And even Saquon Barkley, when he was drafted second overall, Dave Gettleman in New York with the Giants, they kind of crushed him for it for the pick. I don't know that anybody's crushing him for it now when you see him go to Philadelphia and win a Super Bowl. Has the importance reemerged for the running back in the April draft?
Well, I think so. I think that most clubs still kind of see it. The nice thing about taking a running back in that first round is you get the 5 years. You got that leverage point that you can play with that running back. So if you want to really play it out, you technically have the player under contract for 7 years. Think about the turnover of head coaches and GMs in 7 years in the NFL. You've probably got 24 head coaches that have been fired in the 7 years, right? So it's amazing. So it's an important piece. And I don't think it's really changed dramatically. Again, I'm a big believer in running backs. I purposely traded up at the bottom of the first round to draft Doug Martin to be able to get that 5th year, to make sure I had, the hamster ready to go. But in this draft class, it's not as good of draft class. Now, there's some good players, but it's not as deep as I think we've seen other draft classes at the running back position, which is actually going to be helpful for some of these guys at the top of the draft, because it's going to be like, where do I trigger? And maybe it's a guy that I used to think, if I get in the second or third round, it might be not so fast. And I think when you look around the NFL, there are some teams out there that, like we just talked about, the Pittsburgh Steelers, like your best friends, the Dallas Cowboys. There are teams out there just glaring and saying, hey, I need a running back. I think you could put the Las Vegas Raiders into that conversation. So there's teams, I said Oakland. I think you put some of those teams into that conversation. So when you look at this running back class, there's really good players that can fit you right away. And I think they're plug and play day one.
By the way, the muscle hamster, one of the best nicknames of all time. And man, I think you made a wise pick there. Injuries befell him, but what a great start to his career he was having down there in Tampa. That's for sure. So let's get to that general overview. And by the way, I guess, is it safe to say that Ashton Genty, the Heisman Trophy winner, or could have been the Heisman Trophy winner out of Boise State, who was up there for the award, that he is the class of this running back group coming out this year?
Yeah, and it's pretty cut and dry. I don't think there's going to be any board, unless there's something medically I don't know about or something character I haven't heard about. I got to think that he's number one running back on just about every board on all 32 clubs. It would be very surprising to see that he isn't. I mean, this guy has so many things going for him, right? He's got body control. He's got balance. He's got great strength and run after the catch. He breaks arm tackles. I mean, here's a guy, what was it? He carried the ball so many times, 374 carries and averaged 7 yards a carry. I don't care who you're playing. 7 yards a carry 370 times in one season is ridiculously good. But he's got the yards after contact, and that's what I love about running backs is that those guys that can, take the first hit, but still kind of keep their head, their vision. He's compact as a runner, so he does a good job of bending his ankles and his knees to make sure he stays shifty and be able to spin out of tackles or, again, run through them. He's just got about everything. He's got a great stiff arm. He's got natural vision. When I build a board, I think he's a 1.5, meaning I think he's going to go somewhere early, like 10, 11, 12, 13. I don't know if he'll go in the top 10 because I think depending on how the quarterback things play out, there's still some really good skill guys that are going to be available on the pass rushers. But I think he's right on that bubble, anywhere from 8 to 15. But I put him as a 1.5 on my board right now as I look at him as a football player in the National Football League draft.
And again, for everybody, if they haven't been joining us, shame on them for just getting into the GM shuffle here. But we've been doing this for a couple of weeks. Can you explain to the people very quickly that rating system? If it's under a 1, you're looking at maybe a top 10 pick. 1.5 obviously gets you in that next tier. And then somebody over 2, you're looking at 20 to 30 range, correct?
Yeah, that's right. And that's exactly right. So if I give a guy a 1.0, that means he's 1 to 10, or 2.0, 1 to 10 in the second round, 3.0, 1 to 10 in the third round, that kind of stuff. And then that 1.5 means 11 to 21. And then the 1.9 means anywhere from 22 to 32. So that's kind of the way we grade it. We put them all together. And as we're building this board, I've got my own little chart that we'll kind of share at the end where, okay, now what did the board look like? When we're all said and done, what does round 1 look like when we kind of go through all the, like we've done, the pass rushers, we've done the quarterbacks, we've done, some of the skill guys, the cornerbacks, things like that. Now we're doing running backs. We'll still have wide receivers to do. We've still got tight ends. We've got other positions we need to get to. But that's how we're going to try to put this thing all together so we can kind of put together what does a board look like when we're all said and done. Now everybody can just destroy it. It comes down to draft day. But it's a fun process. So that's kind of the overall thought. The next running back is Amarian Hampton, the running back out of North Carolina. To me, he's the number 2 running back. I would think he's going to be number 2 running back on just about every board because of his production, what he's been able to do. I have met him. He's a high character kid, going to make you very comfortable. But he's a very, very productive player as well. And I think the best thing about him is he's got really quick feet. So, I mean, I think that's the one thing you look when you're looking at running backs. I like the way he's, compact, able to, hold his body and move around. But it's his foot quickness, being able to jump cut, be able to, get skinny in the hole, be able to pop and change directions really quickly. All give him a lot of flexibility in terms of what he can do. So I really like Hampton. And I think he's got good hands to catch the ball in the backfield, which is a part that we're going to break down here in a second also that's really important at these running back position.
Yeah, I love it. And again, some of these guys you look at as maybe are they 2-down backs? Are they 3-down backs? I'm sure that's going to go into your grading system here as well. Number 3 in your board's a very popular guy from Ohio State. And it almost feels like 2 years ago he was maybe higher up on the boards than he was even after last year. What do you make of Travion Henderson out of Ohio State?
Yeah, the more I watched him, the more I like him. Every time I watch him a little bit more, I'm like, oof, this guy really can grow on you. He, a really productive, college career. But man, can he be explosive? He's just got so many things going for him. I love the way that he just kind of moves and the speed that he shows you on tape. Like what he ran at the combine is what he is on tape, right? So he's got home run threat all the time, and he's got the frame to be able to work through it and fight through it. So I think he's got great hands to catch the ball in the backfield. I think he's a complete all-around 3-down back like you're talking about, but I love the overall way he runs. He runs with, I think, with a real downhill presence where he's, and he gets to his top speed quickly, which is important as well when you've got that kind of size. He's just a really good back. Hampton, I put as a 1-9. I think it's going to be right on the bubble at the bottom of the first. Henderson I have as a 2-0. So I think he's going to go top of the second very quickly, kind of in that range. Those two are really close to me. I still have Hampton a little bit ahead of Henderson right now. Again, not knowing Henderson's character or anything medical, but I love what I watch on tape when I see Henderson play.
The fourth guy on your list is Caleb Johnson. What's the grade you have on Caleb? And if Travion is borderline day 1, day 2, I'm assuming Johnson's a day 2 guy for you?
Yeah, I do. I do have him as day 2. I have him as a 2.5. And I like Johnson. I think, he's what he is he's a little bit more higher cut as a running back. And what do I mean by that? So he doesn't quite bend the same way, like in his knees and ankles. And so he takes a little bit bigger hits in the hole. So that's the only thing you sit there and say, is there a toughness issue here? None. Like there is no toughness issue with this guy. He runs super hard. He has speed. He does have the good lower body strength and he does have good acceleration, but he doesn't have the make you miss. I think the other guys do because he's a little tighter in his lower body. So that pulled me back a little from him to kind of separate him from the other guys, which is why I dropped him down to that 2.5 range instead of the 2.0 or the 1.9.
For your overall prospects, it is out of these 4. When you look at that combination, and I guess the third element to this too is, pure rusher, obviously, somebody out of the backfield that can catch it out of the backfield. And then how about that blitz pickup? Is it hard to gauge that, Mark, as a GM, as to which guys will be able to pick that up so that they can be 3 down backs instead of somebody else I got to take out of there?
Yeah, I mean, it gets a little tricky. Pass protection obviously is a critical part of what you've got to do in the National Football League. To be a third down back, you've got to be able to stand in there, make the good decision, know what your responsibilities are, and have the toughness to at least slow them down as they run through your body instead of like playing Olay like you're a bullfighter. So these guys have to have that. Break them down. There's a little bit of difference. I broke them down like who of these 4, who's the best runner? Of these 4, who's the best pass catcher? And then of these 4, who are the best overall players, the way I like them in order. So that's kind of the way I kind of looked at it because you have to think about the pass protection part just as much as you do the hands catching the ball in the backfield.
So the best pure runner, is it Genty? And what separates him from the other guys?
Yeah, again, I think it's Genty because of just his overall, ability to see the field. And I feel like he's always like at the next level. He's looking way past where his feet are, and he's already looking 3-4 yards down the field to be able to say, what have I got to do the next move to be able to make sure I get past this player or that player. He's by far, when you look at the runner, I think he's the best runner in this draft class. I think he's super uber talented. And again, it comes down to instincts and vision. I go Hampton as my number 2 best runner, then Henderson. And then that's where I've got, Johnson as the number 4 in terms of if you rank them as pure runners. It was close on Henderson and Hampton, but I have Hampton just a little bit ahead.
I'll say this for the, at least in my book, when you look at Emmitt Smith as the all-time rushing leader in the NFL, those eyes, right? His vision might have been his greatest asset because he wasn't a burner like a Barry Sanders, but his eyes always got him in the right spot because he could see that field. I love the fact that you see that with Genty too. Best pass catchers. It's not going to be Genty number 1. Who's the number 1 for this position here, which is also coveted by coaches?
Yeah, I think Henderson's the best pass catcher out of this group. When I watched them all, watch how naturally he catches a ball, how effortless it is sometimes. Where Genty sometimes will catch a little bit more with his body where you don't have to. He could have caught with his hands. And not that Genty has bad hands. Like, obviously, these guys have all caught footballs. But when I broke them down, I thought Henderson looked the most natural catching the football, then Hampton, then Genty, and then I had Johnson as number 4. So Henderson, to me, is a pass-catching running back. I really like what he brings. Again, it's very effortless. It's as if he played center field in baseball, or he obviously played wide receiver maybe when he was younger. That's the way he looks catching the football.
And very quickly, overall prospects, again, you've got Genty 1, Hampton 2, Henderson 3, Johnson 4. If you're a team like when Detroit made their big move to get Jahmyr Gibbs and move up in the board to get him, some of that was pass catching, right? Could you do that with Henderson? Like the way we run our offense, that maybe we don't want just a guy to hand it off to. We want to get a guy in space. Henderson could be our guy.
Yeah, I think so. I just don't think he's going to be he's got the explosion. He's not the type of runner that I think when we talk about those Gibbs and that type. He's just a little bit more of a big, powerful runner. And so I don't think you're looking for as quick shifties that you saw with those kind of like a Gibbs. So I feel like Henderson's going to be on that bubble. I think he goes in the top of the second. I I think Hampton's right on the bubble, but to me, it's Genty. If you want a running back, it's pretty easy to take him. It's hard to see the missed potential in his game in terms of the way he plays both in pass protection and running the football.
Jerry Jones, I hope you're listening. Genty could be available at number 12. Mark, great stuff building that board, man. Look forward to it each and every week, and we will do it again right here next week on the GM Shuffle.